Thank you very much. I just want to say some words in conclusion. I'm not going to do what I think sometimes people try and do at the end of a conference, which is to summarise, because you've all heard the same information as I've heard, and you can all do your own summaries. But I was tempted when Rebecca was speaking to think maybe we should have stopped the conference at that point, because if we wanted to give a summary, I thought the two very powerful and moving quotes that she gave summarised for me very beautifully the messages that are at the heart of what we're trying to do today. But I do want to begin with some thank yous. First of all, I want to thank all of our participants today. We planned this conference with a number of key logistical aims. We wanted to bring a dynamic and expert range of voices. We wanted to ensure a good gender balance on our panels. And we wanted to ensure that a significant number of the voices that we heard today were Palestinian. And we wanted also to ensure that a good proportion of the voices we heard would also be from a younger generation. And I hope you agree that we have largely achieved these goals. And I'm conscious I say that as a man who is not maybe in the first flush of youth, but is at least Palestinian. So will you join with me, first of all, in thanking all of those who have spoken on panels, chair sessions, for facilitating work. Can I also ask you to thank the outstanding PSC staff team for the work they've done. It is a team effort. It's invidious to pick out individuals, but I do, having said that, I want to pay particular tribute to Lewis, who had this in his job brief and has worked tirelessly over the last few months pulling it together. And can I give a final special thank you to Nadia Hijab from Al Shabaka, not just for helping run a workshop today, but Nadia also provided immense expertise in working with us to pull together a framing, a structure and a suggested list of speakers for today, and the success of this event would not have been possible without her contribution. So please thank Nadia. Now, the core of the work that we do at PSC is to build a campaign in the UK that will create mainstream pressure to change UK government policy so that Israel begins to be held meaningfully to account for its violations of Palestinian rights, and mainstream pressure that will work to build the campaign for boycott, divestment and sanctions that places direct pressure on Israel economically, culturally and politically. And we know that to do that effectively, we need to educate the broader public so that they are properly informed with correct narratives about Palestine, but also to educate ourselves, so that as activists and campaigners we are properly armed with the tools we need to stand up for Palestine. The right language, the right knowledge, the right framing. This is crucial, particularly in the climate within which we operate, where we know there are people ready to pounce upon, to exploit or manipulate any language or any framing that is loose or not exact. However unfair the unlevel playing field is, we cannot afford not to be smart, not to be accurate, and not to be informed. Now, we at PSC believe that the most appropriate framing, not the sole framing, but the most strategically beneficial framing within which we can describe the oppression of the Palestinian people is that of apartheid. And that means that we need to understand and articulate and explain how the structure of power that Israel has imposed upon Palestinians, whether imposed through the denial of equality to Palestinian citizens of Israel, through the mechanisms of military occupation, or through the denial of the right of return to refugees, how all of those exist as part of a structure of power founded upon the principle that rights can be allocated on the basis of ethnicity, culture, or religion, however one wishes to define Jewishness. Now, we know that our right to articulate these truths is under threat. Here in the UK, as most of you are aware, in March of this year, a delegation of MPs led by Joan Ryan, Chair of Labour Friends of Israel, handed in a petition to Downing Street calling for legislation to make illegal in UK universities events defining Israel as an apartheid state. Now, our task is to focus our energy not simply in defining the legitimacy of this narrative, but to articulate and make clear why it is rooted in evidence, truths and realities, and what must be done in accordance with universally accepted human rights principles to address those realities and change them. Now, as part of the preparation for this conference, we produced some resources in partnership with Visualising Palestine. If you haven't seen them, they're over here on my left. There's another set, the same resources, out in the hall. Please have a look at them before you go, and we welcome feedback. Over the next few months, we intend to produce more resources, written, graphic and visual, that articulate and explain the facts that we have been discussing today in ways that we hope will be accessible to the wider public. And again, we welcome partners who would like to work with us in the development of those resources. But as a wise man who was also not in the first flush of youth once said, our task is not simply to explain the world, but to change it. So when Nadia and I began to discuss how we should structure this conference, one point on which we were both agreed was that it must be forward-looking and positive, that it should concentrate not just in a deconstruction of the nature of Israeli oppression and the manner in which it denies rights to Palestinians, but on what we must do to move from apartheid towards freedom, justice and equality. And this demands, as we've been addressing in this last panel and in the workshops today, building a stronger global movement against apartheid that supports and works alongside Palestinian resistance. Now, to be successful, again as we've heard, this movement needs to exist and be accepted as part of a wider anti-racist movement. The emergence of Trump and the growth of far-right movements across the world makes this a crucial task. And this is why, for me, it's been inspiring today to hear about the work forming an alliance against apartheid that is being developed in Spain, and from Rebecca about the progressive alliances that are emerging and are being formed in the United States. Here in the UK, this was the message we took to the Stand Up to Trump demonstrations, where the campaign for Palestinian rights was a central and core issue.
Because if we continue to just sit here and put Palestine on a pedestal, what does that say to other people who are experiencing similar things? It's saying we don't give a shit about you. It's saying that we think that we deserve this over you. And that's not what I'm trying to build. And so I feel like it's scary, because you're like, oh, well, I'm just going to tell the U.S. like, actually, you're doing the same exact thing. But that's how they learn it from each other. I mean, clearly seeing Bolsonaro's election in Brazil and seeing Trump and Netanyahu immediately going, great, we have a new friend. That should be...
For justice in Palestine is part of the universal struggle for justice everywhere. And as we know, this struggle feels more urgent than ever for most of our political lives. The Palestinians, we are witnessing an entrenchment of oppression that many commentators have rightly, I think, begun to call a new Nakba. Settlement expansion at the fastest rate since the Oslo Accords. Alongside Khan al-Ahmar, 45 other Palestinian communities in the West Bank facing forcible transfer. The passing of the nation-state bill, which, as Hazan was saying earlier, does not represent the introduction of apartheid inside Israel, but is rather Israel rubbing the world's noses in the reality of apartheid. The continuing, crippling siege on Gaza, and now week by week, still, every Friday, away from the focus of the world's media, Israel continuing to kill and maim protesters in the right of return. And the US cuts to UNRWA that have to be understood not simply as an issue of humanitarian concern, but as part of a broader attempt to redefine the status of refugees so as to remove the collective rights of an entire people. The moment is urgent, and our task is urgent. So I hope we all leave today better equipped with the tools we need to engage in that struggle, but also I hope you leave, as I do, inspired by the reminder of the outstanding activists and thinkers and campaigners and human rights defenders alongside whom we are working. And if you are not finally a member of PSC, and I won't take a show of hands, I hope today has inspired you to join. Now, our next major event is on November the 28th, when we are organising a national lobby of Parliament. We hope to see you all there. Please begin now, if you haven't, in contacting your MP to make sure that they attend. Finally, thank you all for coming. Safe journeys home. Onwards together towards freedom, justice and equality.